Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from here on this beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where you will not get any fake media and distortion of information. Can't say that for the mainstream media, can you? Anyway, before I begin the show, I would encourage people, if you're listening to this on YouTube, to go ahead and follow that link up in the corner and check out my website. Also, since some of the social media out there just seems not to reach as many people as it used to, and I'm not making any accusations on any one particular social media platform that's very popular out there. I would encourage people to also go to Twitter. If you have Twitter, follow me at PsychoMike777. And that way, we need a network. We need to be able to reach people and to be able to, get information out. Because information is what's necessary for us to have an informed population, and also to be able to question and stand up to when we're just getting hit with a lot of propaganda. So anyway, I promised when I did a show a few weeks ago that was dealing with the 6 stages of the robotic revolution. Stage 1, essentially, simple robots, assembly lines. Stage 6, may replace us, may actually see the end of organic humans. But if you want to, just check my YouTube station out and you can see that. It's one of the more recent shows that I did. But I also promised that I would deal with this idea of where that would take our economy. And that's a very crucial question. It's not one that's just something that you'll see on, conspiracy websites or Fringe or whatever. This is an issue that's being discussed by corporations, scientists, economists, because we're walking into uncharted territory. What will happen economically when robots can do every single job that we can, and the robots become cheap and affordable for all? I was in a McDonald's in Beijing, China just recently, and it was kind of interesting that that you had to actually order. At least that's what, we were kind of told. You had to order from a console, and then you would go pick your food up from the person taking the money. And, a lot of these restaurants, I think, are going to go that way. You see this at the big restaurants now. More and more consoles going in. And, where you do the job of, okay, I want this, this, and this. You hit enter, you go up, and, you get your food. You're going to see more and more replacement of jobs. You go into stores now, you can order, you can just check yourself out. Day and night tellers. That put an end to a lot of jobs at banks. I remember back in high school and early in college, we're talking late 70s and the early 80s. It used to be a job that a lot, especially women, would get in order to bring in extra income so they could go to school and wouldn't have to take any student loans. And the thing is that those jobs are no longer available, meaning that it's a little bit harder to earn money to be able to, have a supplemental income or to pay for a college education. And this trend's just going to continue. I was reading an article recently that said that soon robots will be diagnosing you. Think about that. One of our most prestigious jobs in our society has been doctors, and that could be replaced. In fact, doctors could be replaced quicker than nurses, because at least nurses provide a certain human, care and a feeling like you have someone there at your side when you're sick or have an injury. Now, let's just fast forward this. Let's say that in, let's just guess 50 years. Let's say in 50 years, we no longer need human labor. Okay? Some people would envision in a utopia that it would be fantastic. People could concentrate on their families. They could concentrate on learning and growing. You get this image of people just walking around in like Plato style. I mean Plato, P-L, A-T-O. I had to think about that for a second. Plato style philosophizing and so forth. And it's not necessarily guaranteed that would be the future. Now, there have been quite a few economists that have talked about the idea of what you call a living guaranteed wage. Now, bear with me. This could come with some pretty severe attachments. In my book, the most recent book I wrote, The Destiny of Our Past, you have a society. It's supposed to be set 12,000 years ago during the era of Noah. You have a society in which most of your really tedious jobs are done not by robots, but by synthetic humans. People that have just been put together through random DNA, and then they have no human rights because they have no parents. So they didn't inherit any true humanity, even though they are conscious and they have brains and, just like any other person. And what you have is the elite families. There's supposed to be like 13 major families, and then a family that's attached to them, making a total of 26. And these families have decided that they want to eliminate the commoners, as they call them. This is a eugenically advanced group that doesn't manipulate their genes except for longevity. And the thing is, this could actually be the future in a sense. And here's what I mean by this. If you give everyone a standard wage, no one's working, you put a tax on items purchased, and then this recirculates the money, and then you can pay people, and you're kind of paying them to be able to keep the economy going. It would be a reversal, in a sense, of the industrial age. It would just be a giant, in a sense, welfare society. Now, think about this. Just like in my book, Destiny of Our Past, think about this. Does the elite or the powers that be want people reproducing, and yet you don't need them as workers anymore? What do you do? I mean, this is a problem, because many of these people would still be of the mindset that, well, we got to reduce population. We don't need as many people anymore, and they're using resources and so forth, even though obviously we could recycle resources. The thing I would envision with a certain standard living wage that would be guaranteed is that it would probably be big enough that you could live, but it would be too small in order for you to live in a nice, comfortable suburban house with the, 4 bedrooms and the ability to have space and to raise a family. And so I would tend to think it would be more in line with these, what you hear more and more about, sustainable housing, sustainable urban housing, in which you're essentially saying you build these nice, comfortable apartments, but they're only big enough really for one person to live comfortably. A little bit bigger than a dorm room in college, for those of you who stayed in dorms when you were in college, but too small really to do much else. Now it just reminded me, when I visited Russia, I would go into some of these apartments that were built during the Stalin period, and they were small. Okay, and they were, the irony was that Russians, Soviets at the time, were encouraged to have large families. The government, wanted more workers and more military and so forth. They saw humans as a valuable resource. The problem was that the housing they built was pretty much the most effective contraception they had. Because if you could imagine the living, I don't even know how many, square feet or square meters these places were. But you had a tiny living room, maybe 2 tiny bedrooms, a bathroom, which is usually really small, and a kitchen. Often the kitchen and the living room were sort of the same. And you could fit maybe 1,000 people into an apartment complex. But you couldn't really comfortably raise, a family. Sure, you could. You could raise maybe 2 kids and not feel like you were just, stacked in a closet. And I think this is what they have in mind when they talk about sustainability, when they talk about things about a lot of these programs that are using terms like 2030 and 2040 and so forth for their goals, is that the population will be increasingly urban. Small communities are going to continue to decline. Large city centers will continue to grow. And under those circumstances, then, you will see, if we have a living wage that would then support a person in an urban center, you're talking about people being permanently bachelors and bachelorettes. Now, there has been some talk that the future will be one of polyamory, in which you will have maybe, family networks rather than, mom and dad and the kids. You can find this today, actually. It's not a lot of people statistically, but it still does exist, where you have, and it's true, especially in the either really poor communities or kind of the avant-garde, well-off communities. You'll see this kind of thing where you might have 3 women and 1 man, and they all share each other. Or you have 2 men and 1 woman, and they share each other. It's not sister wives, because they don't usually, when you have religious polygamy, you don't see relations between the wives. But in polyamory, you do. And some of the predictions are that in the future, you'll see more polyamory, because males are more likely to just get comfortable and not really go out and try to form families. Women are more likely to form families and a desire to form a family. And so if you have this situation where you've got all these individuals living in their individual little cubicles, then you might see it where maybe one guy is able to impregnate 4 women with they'll have 1 child, maybe 2, and yet the majority of the population will be childless. The vast majority of men, and maybe even a majority of women, will remain childless. And this will cause a culling of the populations, especially in the urban areas. So in a sense, urban areas have always been very bad for fertility, usually. Modern day situations aside, in the past, you usually saw people when they move into cities, they tend to have small families, if any families at all. And at least in the middle class sections of our urban areas, children are kind of rare. And so if you have a situation where suddenly you don't have work and you get this guaranteed check in the mail, and you have a small home, and at the same time you can imagine what the technology will be like in 20 years. I mean, it's going to be more realistic virtual reality. It's going to be more hologram, entertainment and so forth. A lot of guys could just feel very comfortable sitting there and playing video games all day, long, and really not getting out. And a lot of the people out there making predictions for the future are talking about the idea of robots. And I still think that robots are going to be, and what I mean by that is robot companions. And I think that more men will have robot companions than women. Men may be satisfied with the idea of someone by that time, someone who is attractive and can have a conversation, never ages. You can mix and match characteristics, as easily as reupholstering a couch. You could just get a new face on your robot and so forth. I think more men would go for that than women. And so, yes, you will see a huge, huge decline in population once you have this robot era going into effect. And all of the services and all of the manufacturing done by non-humans. Now, what might be the effect then after all of this? Okay, what could be the future if we do get to a point where robots are commonplace? I think there will be a sense that we will lose to a large degree a certain sense of humanity. I think that you might see people, and it's been shown in some science fiction, the idea that your robots may actually be at a point where they are sentient in some ways, where they appear to be human in the sense of thinking and self-reflection. But if they have no rights, then, well, you can just do whatever you want with them and not have any problems any more than you can buy a brand new computer and just throw it in the garbage. I mean, no one's going to care. But I know the EU is contemplating human rights for robots and so forth, but I'm not sure such things would hold up. I mean, what would be the defining point between a simple device and a synthetic human being? That would not be easy to really define. So I'm wondering if the only people who will be able to really have families and to be able to persevere will be the ones who will be the bitter clingers, as Obama talked about certain segments of the population a few years ago. It could be people who choose more of a rural lifestyle. They might be away from all the wonders of the urban areas, and they may choose to make money in more traditional ways. But then again, I'm wondering if if the economy is totally automated, with manufacturing, then wouldn't the money be a lot automated as well? And what I mean by that is, wouldn't the money be electronic? And if that was the case, if, for instance, the government just felt like, well, we would like to make all of, I don't know, Colorado into aside from maybe Denver, into send it back to nature. Send it back to the way it was before Europeans and so forth arrived in the state. And then you would have to do it. You'd have to make laws that would keep people from basically living in rural areas. And maybe you wouldn't even have to make a law. You just make it to where they can't earn the money if they stay there. And if they can't manufacture something themselves, they would be forced to come into the city. Now, I don't know if it would really get to that stage. I think perhaps there would be certain allowances made. During the Soviet Union era, even when they were really down on religion, they allowed a certain level of freedom in places like Siberia. And I don't mean, freedom in the gulags. That meant that if you lived out in the remote area, in some remote village in Siberia, past the Ural Mountains, then usually Moscow and St. Petersburg, they didn't really care so much about that. The same was true of the Muslims that lived in the Caucasus regions. If they were just up in the mountains, it's kind of like, yeah, whatever. And this could be the case, and I think it would be the case in regards to if this goes into effect, this 2030, 2040 agenda type things. And not saying that these specifically talk about robots. I'm just saying these things always talking about sustainability and discussing, these urban atmospheres and getting rid of poverty and all of this. Once robots kind of take over all the jobs, you wouldn't really have poverty, would you? It's not that you wouldn't have affluence, though, aside from the mega wealthy, the ones who own the corporations in the first place, and banking institutions and so forth, maybe politicians, maybe some professionals that could not be replaced. But overall, most of the population would be kind of herded together like sheep in these urban, environments. And while they might be quite sustainable, you might be able to allocate resources in a very efficient way. The freedoms would not exist the way we think of. And you might even have something where you might even, I don't know if there'd be any need for it, but you might mandate smaller families just to make sure that there aren't a few people out there having large ones. Not sure that would be necessary, because what we see in Europe, for instance, is people have just stopped having kids. Italy's birth rate just went down even more, and it was already low. Like one child per man and woman of the millennial age group or younger Generation X. Now that means that the population will die out eventually. Now, and a lot of people think, well, yeah, but they have a lot of immigration. But you see, if everyone has a guaranteed income, and this could be done on a worldwide basis, then migration and immigration wouldn't even be necessary in order to, moving yourself to Europe from, I don't know, Morocco might be kind of silly since, if you go up to northern Germany or Scandinavia, you're just going to freeze your you-know-what off, and yet you can still make the same money in Morocco. Now, this will also, I would tend to think, lead to some sort of one-world government, because you would have to have this organized and maintained in a very efficient manner. It'd be like the old Soviet planning, but at the same time, it wouldn't, because you would actually be able to run things with efficiency, as opposed to the Soviet Union, which was very inefficient. And so you're probably thinking, well, this would be a massive structure. I mean, already we have 7 billion people. I think they could manage to do it. And, they could manage to put everything under a central control. Now, the other problem I would have, though, with this is, if you've ever watched the movie The Time Machine, and I mean the 1960 version, I actually think you should watch it. You really, really, really should watch it. There's a lot of these movies that were made during that era that were really well done, as opposed to nowadays where you might have some that are well done, but they're not really deep. So the older movies were much more deep. But the Time Machine, the Eloi, they kind of look like Swedish people sitting by a river when the Englishman goes into the future and finds this society that exists. They're fed upon by the Morlocks. And, they give them the fruit and vegetables and stuff, and they eat them, like good vegans. And then they are herded in and eaten by these mutants that live underground. And, the point there is that these Eloi were very, very docile. And, the libraries had, when this Englishman goes into a library that's nearby, the books are all rotten. They've deteriorated. They're of no value anymore. And the interesting thing is that if you had a situation where robots are doing everything for you, then why bother? Why bother with really worrying about education? I mean, might be 14, you just sit around looking at video games all day long or other things. But the thing is that would you really train to be an engineer if all the engineers are now robots? That wouldn't really make that much sense. Now, there are some that have said that people will join the robots in the sense that they will become cybernetic individuals themselves, which means that maybe only 20% of your body that you're with right now, if we had this kind of technology, will be yours. The rest of it will be put, into some sort of robot chassis, you might say. And then you'd be able to function at the same advanced level as the robots. And I don't know if that's going to be possible. It would be strange, though. I mean, seriously, it would be strange. Now, overall, I'm not trying to paint a pessimistic picture of the future. A lot of things can happen. I just want listeners to keep an eye out. Is it necessarily conspiracy to say that these kinds of things could happen when we know that if we look through a lot of this stuff that's got predictions for the future, we find people making comments about this brave new world that we're heading into and how it might be advantageous for humanity and the environment and so forth. Well, yeah, I tend to think, though, that it will be a period in which many, if not most, families will go extinct. What we consider traditional morals and family structure will have a really hard time maintaining themselves in this almost playtime environment. And, you got to keep an eye on currency. Is the reason why money is being phased out, and you can just Google that, money being phased out. Is it because of this idea that, well, maybe 15 or 20 years from now, there won't be any jobs that we think of as they are today? Keep an eye on this. And otherwise you're just kind of, you kind of float along, and then when things happen, you're like, hey, what's going on here? Well, that happens when you're not keeping abreast of things. And hopefully people listening to this broadcast are the kind of people that do keep abreast of things. So anyway, that ends our first half of the show. If I would encourage people to stay tuned for the other half, or just come back next week. Now remember though, check out Twitter. Also, if you can share these videos, if you like the video, hit share, because obviously it will help spread the word and get past a lot of the ladders and ceilings that you have to go past in a lot of social media platforms in order to then wind up seen by more and more people. Anyway, it's no use griping about social media and other things. I think we should be thankful for it, and we should use it. It's just we got to use it wisely.